Good afternoon, all. My name is Sophie Hooper, and I will be your host for today's webinar, which is brought to you in collaboration with Wates FM. The aim of today is to introduce our new guidance notes supported by Wates on how to optimize your maintenance strategy in line with organizational objectives and beyond, and to help share insight on how our panel is optimizing their maintenance approach. We will consider which questions do you need to ask? How do you make sure you align with wider business outcomes, including sustainability and post-pandemic settlement? What are the conditions for organizational optimization? What is the role of technology? What kind of people are needed to deliver all of this? The running order of this session is that David Hemming, the technical author of our newly launched guidance note, Next Generation Maintenance, Challenges and Opportunities, will briefly present the new guidance, after which we will be joined by Stephanie Welsh and Anthony Collette to discuss the key challenges and opportunities in our panel discussion. I would like to encourage you, the panel, to ask questions throughout. We will pick these up and discuss them after the presentation, but please put the questions in the Q&A box, not the chat. And like all platforms, you will be able to ask them anonymously if you would prefer to do so. But in first instance, before I give a hand over to David, I would like to briefly introduce, let Anthony introduce himself and the rest of our panel too.
Good afternoon, everyone. I feel really privileged to be here. I'll start with an apology. You can probably hear in my voice I'm recovering from COVID, but delighted to be here. But so please be patient with any coughing. So a little bit about me. I'm relatively new to Wates. I run our FM division. I run our FM business. Prior to that, I've been in property a little longer than I'd like to think. So about at least 15 years of change and business development in the old world. What do we need to do as FM organisations to keep ahead of our customers, maintain and deliver good services, deliver good products and technology into the operation, so we're as effective as we can be? And that started very briefly with the managing agent, where we looked after diverse supply chain. And then I led and ran and helped lead and run two really good businesses, Integral and JLL and Mighty. And I've joined Wates in January. I'm delighted to be here.
Thank you, Anthony. Stephanie, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sophie. As Sophie mentioned, I'm Steph Welch. I'm the London office leader and head of workplace and facilities in London. I have been there now 14 years, so I'm not going to go back through my history like Anthony did, so you can guess how old I am. You can do that with the face. It's a lovely pleasure to be here and be part of the discussion and to continue the discussions that we've all previously had as well. I have a great interest in improvement, conditions-based maintenance, and also that drive to carbon net zero as well, and currently looking at full electrification of our London offices. Thank you very much.
David?
David Hemming. I'm currently the Interim Director of Estates and Facility Management here at the University of Sheffield. I'm probably slightly unusual in the FM community, or some people will say actually not that unusual, and I found my way here almost by accident. I'm a chartered civil engineer by background. I started working on sites over 30 years ago, but slowly moved to more estate management and facility management over that career, mostly in the public sector through defence, higher education, NHS, and I've also been out and done a level of consultancy. So hence why I was asked to be the technical author of this guide.
Thank you very much, David. And I will now hand over to you to give that introduction, please, to our new guidance.
Right. Hopefully technology will work. And there we go. So really, the first question to answer is, why write this guide? Simple view was, as can be seen in that quote by JFK, the world is changing rapidly. We are post-pandemic. We are still trying to work out how the workplace should be used with hybrid working. We've got really difficult economic factors with inflation, cost of living, and trying to address that. We have technology moving at a rapid pace, and that presents all sorts of opportunities. But also we have one of the biggest challenges through climate change. Therefore, we thought this was an opportune moment to give FMs and the sector some sort of top tips and guides to help them navigate through the opportunities and the threats for the coming year. It's probably worth me saying what this guide is and what it's not as well. This guide is really about highlighting some top level themes and signposting to some more detailed documentation. It is not a step-by-step guide to how to do it. There are many other guides out there, but it's worth me saying we were trying to keep it short and concise, but covering a lot of areas. So the themes that I'm going to cover and reflected in the guide are the ones you see on the screen: risk, how to measure maturity, what is best practice, the strategies you can use, and workforce. So let's move forward. And I think the starting point for any conversation really is, first and foremost, how does the estate enable the business? How do we, get to the bottom line of what does the estate need to do? Now, really, once you have that clarity and of the importance of the estate, you need to then have a conversation about risk. Now, most people on this call will be really clear, risk is about combining the probability of an event with its consequence. Now, challengingly, a lot of time risk is linked to a health and safety perspective. Therefore, any risk is a negative. However, this is about the bigger issue of risk. And we should be really clear that risk can result in both a positive consequence as well as a negative consequence. So you need to understand really what is the appetite of the business to pursue risk, and what decisions can you make and can't you make based on that pursuit. Now, risk appetite is not necessarily well discussed or heard about. You will see within the guide that I've referenced, the Institute of Risk Management, and which is a fantastic guide that takes you through the whole issue of risk appetite. And part of this is getting clarity from the decision makers on their appetite for risk. In this table, which comes out of the Treasury Orange Book on risk management, are some categories of risk. And it's trying to get a conversation about, are you averse to risk or are you open to risk? And therefore, those will be linked to the decisions you make. And you can see there are different terminologies, different categories, but each organization should have clarity on what appetite it has for different elements. And once you understand your appetite for the risk, you also really need to understand the capacity of the business to take risks, because while there may be an appetite, if the business cannot sustain a risk going the wrong way, then it will have a detrimental effect. So it's about understanding the risk tolerance and the organizational boundaries for risk. If we quickly just put it into a graphic form, what we see here is the performance of a business over a period of time, and current direction of travel is positive. So we're improving our performance. If we overlay the whole gamut of risk, there is a possibility that our performance could improve if things go right, but it could also be detrimental if it all goes wrong. The IRM talk about this being the totality of risk, the risk universe. We then need to understand how we can bound the elements of risk that we know, and that would be described as the risk tolerance. And once we've accepted that, we can then set the boundary of risk. Now, this is about performance in general, but there could be separate risk appetite for different elements of the estate and its maintenance. So I talk about maturity models. This is really about having a level of self-awareness of, how good are your capabilities, your capacity, your competence in the organization. Do you have the right processes and procedures? Now, at this moment in time, there is no definitive model for maturity in FM. It is something that the IWFM is really interested in looking and trying to define and provide guidance. That will hopefully come out in the not too distant future. But when you want to assess maturity, you want to be able to benchmark yourself first and foremost against where you currently are, and then by looking at your strengths and weaknesses, where you need to go. But also it allows you to benchmark yourself against other organizations of similar ilk. And really what the guide talks about is understanding where you are on this continuum, and it won't be a surprise when you do a full assessment, you actually might find yourself at the bottom end of this. And it should be pointed out, not all organizations need to get to level 5 optimized. It may not be appropriate. The investment may not be required. But actually, where you really want to be getting to is ensuring that your estate is compliant, and then it's where do you move from there. So the body of knowledge, as I said, this is a short guide. It is not trying to replicate everything that is out there. But I would recommend, and this guide highlights, there should be a good understanding of what statutory compliance actually means and how you can deliver it, because that is the thing that will keep you or the executive out of prison or a large fine. Now, the IWFM is working with a number of professional bodies to try and articulate what statutory compliance needs to look like, because if you ask a group of people, they will all have slightly different views. So the organizations we're working with are BISRIA and SIBSI, SFG20, a lot of the main players in the sector that provide advice and guidance. So again, they provide a great deal of information in many, many publications. So we would recommend that you become familiar with those publications. Now, the challenge we recognize is a lot of them require a paid subscription. You're already a member of the IWFM, that's why you're here. There's lots of free guidance already, but you need to consider how much the investment is worth getting access to documents from SIBSI, BISRIA, or British Standards. Now, if you're a small organisation and you don't have the money to invest in corporate membership of those bodies, what we've tried to highlight is actually the public sector provide a great deal of information which is free to access and readily available just through the internet. A good starting point, believe it or not, is this document. This is from the NHS. It is one of their health technical memorandums, and there's a full suite of documents. But the reason why I highlight this, and this one is slightly dated, it is due for renewal, is in the back of this document is probably one of the best lists of legislation linked to the built environment that I found in one single place. So as a reference point, it's a great start to understand what compliance may look like. It also then goes on and highlights other professional and standards which you might want to see or read to give you some wider understanding. Staying with the public sector, the Office of Government Property and the Government Property Agency have been looking to up the capabilities and the competence of the public sector in this area, and they produced a couple of really good standards which I commend you to go and have a look at. First being the one on general management and services, and it talks about in-house delivery, it talks about outsourced methodologies. Its sister publication is a key document. This is about asset data, and to be honest, part of your maturity model is really understanding whether you understand the underlying data about your estate and therefore what information you can draw from These documents all come within the government functional standard on property, which is the overarching bit, so the wider piece outside of pure facility management. Just recently published, and to be honest, it's something the sector needs to recognise. If it wants to leverage the opportunity from technology, it needs to get better at recording data and storing data in standardised ways. And the government have now produced an example of a data schema, which if you do not have one, this will be an excellent starting point with which to use. Also, there are other areas that FMs have to grapple with. Net zero, and there is an absolute key opportunity here for facility management to play a part in businesses driving towards net zero commitments. But if you don't have a deep knowledge of it, there's a great thing called the Net Zero Estate Playbook, which was published a couple of years ago, and that would be a good read to have. But fundamentally, the advice here is, little and often. Don't put off getting these documents. Start dipping into them. Start expanding your knowledge, of which then you can apply it. So management, maintenance strategies. Really, there are two strategies that you can do. First is the reactive maintenance, i.e. you wait till something breaks, you then repair it. That is a reactive maintenance strategy. The opposite end of the spectrum is proactive maintenance, i.e. trying to maintain something before it fails in an uncontrolled way. Now, when I go back to the starting point of risk, what we have here is the opposite ends of the spectrum. If you are open to risk and you have an open risk appetite, reactive maintenance is a way forward. However, if you are adverse to risk, i.e. you want to have more control, you want to be able to mitigate it, going to proactive maintenance is the way forward. Now, currently the industry standard is using pre-planned maintenance and schemas like SFG20 to help guide us in a very systematic way to a level of maintenance. Now, the challenge with it, while it is risk averse, it is the safe option. What it can mean is that you potentially are over maintaining your assets and potentially spending much more money than you need to do on them. So if you have a level of maturity where you have processes in place, you can move away and you have a corresponding appetite to explore some of these opportunities, but in the knowledge that there are threats behind it. You can look at some of the other techniques that you can fine-tune this. Those being reliability-centered maintenance. Reliability-centered maintenance looks at standardized equipment and how reliable. So you make investment decisions based on good data, but this requires either the organization to collect good data on its equipment and how reliable it is, so investment choices are made on its historic data, or industry standard data. Obviously, a lot of manufacturers aren't necessarily keen to publish exactly how reliable and the mean time between failure of certain components. RCM, heavily used in process industries where keeping plants open and running and leaving them to be maintained at the shortest possible time is a commonplace, but less common in office environments. One of the areas that is regularly talked about is business-focused maintenance. And this goes back to really understanding how the business works, what the priority of the business is, and how the estate supports it. Once you have that knowledge, you can start looking at the activities that truly focus and support the key objectives and take greater risk on the elements that don't. And therefore, the ability to manage risk, your appetite for risk, your maturity on risk management needs to be considerably greater if you wish to use this element. One of the new terminologies that's floating around, and to be honest, you could describe some of the others as condition-based maintenance, is the use of technology to identify how assets are working. Most of us have a car with a modern engine management system, and these systems start telling us a lot of information about the condition of the engine and when things are failing, need topping up, or need servicing. So, by using technology, it is the way forward. Now, if we look, to where we're going to, data and technology can drive all sorts of opportunities. And we get into the area of using analytics to look at that. And we talk about the need to get to predictive and prescriptive maintenance. Now, this diagram will hopefully give you some idea of what we mean. Within the document, we've used analogies. In particular, we've used regular car analogies because most people, if they are lay people, understand cars, or at least maintaining cars. Now, we had a lot of debate about, was this right and appropriate? Should we dumb down this? Now, many people in the FM sector aren't necessarily deeply technical, but even those that are still have to communicate some of these strategies to decision makers that aren't technical. So this is giving you tools of which to try and explain some of these approaches that you may be able to use to drive forward these decisions. So if we look at the bottom end, we talked about predictive analytics. As I was mentioning, this is your energy management system telling you that your car will need servicing in 100 miles, but actually, after you've done a certain number of journeys, which is much less, it will suddenly tell you that your service interval is much quicker. It's because it's looked at the condition of the engine, looked at the environment, and made a decision against a level of predictions. Now, with machine learning and AI, there is opportunity to take that to the next stage. And we can use what's called prescriptive analytics, which allow us to set a whole raft of criteria and drive some decisions. The key example of this is using a sat nav. We put in where we want to go to. We highlight, do we want the fastest route, the scenic route, the route avoiding any tolls? And it gives us the option. That is a prescriptive analytics approach that uses decision support, i.e. the human still does it. However, when we're driving along and there is traffic along our route, we may have set up that if the delay is more than 15 minutes, to redirect us to the fastest point. That is decision automation, i.e. the analytics in real time are going on in the background, and it's making the decision for us, to benefit us. So those are the strategies that you could use. The last area really is workforce. Now, what we see across the industry is, when it comes to the trades, a real challenge in finding the right skills, the right capabilities, having the right capacities, and also the right competencies. And the guide tells you some of the ways to do that. Now, if you're struggling to recruit, you really need to understand where you're recruiting from. Now, predominantly, when we look at the trades, they are a male-dominated area. So if you're struggling to recruit competent individuals, well, you need to think about how you increase that by looking at the 51% of the population that we don't normally appeal to. So we need to look at how the sector can really move that forward. Now, if you're a larger organization and you've got, you're paying the apprentice levy, really start looking at how you can benefit in getting that back. But even if you're a small organization, other people are funding that. Think about how you can use apprentices. If you can't recruit the people with the right skills, look at how you can grow them. Now, the challenge is most of us, as I highlighted at the beginning, probably didn't start our career thinking, I want to be an FM. So part of this, we fall into this career path. Really, what we want to do is make facility management a career of choice. Now, to do that, we need to think about the people we're trying to attract. Many of the youngsters and those who've had kids, they can't believe the world existed before the internet. The YouTube tapes, tells them everything. We need to look at how we're appealing to the digital natives. If you run facility management with, clipboards, paper tickets, and doing it old school because that's the way it works. You have to recognize that that's going to become less and less desirable to the new generations who expect technology to help them. And probably the last point that I want to bring in really is understanding how FMs can really start being, a leading voice in how businesses can drive net zero carbon and be more sustainable. And obviously, the younger generations are very much interested in this. They recognize that they will be around longer. They want to be able to make their own decisions without them being forced on them by our generation, my generation, making decisions about, how it burns up resource. So thinking about driving sustainability will maybe help look at who you want to recruit. That's a quick whistle-stop tour of the guide. I'll hand back to Sophie in the panel.
Thank you, David. Just made a baby mistake by talking when I was still muted. Right. That was quite a mouthful, David. Thank you for that overview of our new guidance. Now, I would like to begin with a fairly open question to you all, kind of linked to the many different challenges actually that you outlined that our colleagues in the FM world have to deal with. Because against that wider context of all these challenges like sustainability goals, cost of living, energy price going up, how widely recognized within the organizations is the importance of the right building maintenance strategy? And that's a question to all of you.
Yeah, why don't I start? So I think, firstly, thank you very much, David. You outlined that really well. And I want to repeat some of the themes. The FM industry there's no two ways about it, is transforming. We are going through almost unprecedented times. We're all still reeling from the post-COVID. The strategies that were there pre have been put in the bin. We've rewritten some of it in terms of hybrid working, but for those of us that are talking regularly to our customers, actually there's some pause there and maybe some rethink around the original reaction to it. And that creates the uncertainty that makes a bit of pressure on us in the FM space. We need to be very agile. The objectives that we set ourselves need to be linked to good core business themes, and we need to watch very closely what happens over the next few weeks, months and years. The technology race is unprecedented. I know we're going to talk about this a little later. So really, for me, when David talked about the maturity model, my first point, I guess, would be it is so important for all FMs that we are very open and honest as to where we are on that journey. Which stage are we at? Because whatever decisions we now make, and whatever investments we want to make, whether it's sustainability investment, technology investment, performance-based investment, we have to make that investment on a solid foundation, and that has to be a foundation of good data and a very good working relationship with your workforce or your outsource provider, and a very good understanding of your processes.
Thanks, Anthony. I would like to echo what you also said, David. I don't think it was oversimplified. I think there's lots of different degrees of knowledge, and I think to have it put out in such a clear and easy way to understand will be beneficial to many. How widely recognised is it within organisations? I think it's becoming more so due to net zero targets and sustainability being at the forefront of what everybody thinks about. But actually, I don't think it goes much beyond that. So I think if you're looking to move, or you are wanting an all-electric building because there's targets that you wish to achieve, then I think that's where it plays a part. But actually, above and beyond that, I don't think it really is on anybody's radar for the actual organisational strategy.
And, I would absolutely concur with that. Historically, a lot of businesses didn't really understand their property, didn't really understand their estate, and actually, as long as it was there and things were fixed, they were happy. There is a real opportunity now for FMs to raise their profile, because they are able to really, if they have the information that stemming from good data, they have the knowledge, they can really help inform significant business decisions where there is lots of money being spent on its property, decisions about how efficient that property needs to be, how well maintained that property needs to be, and how likely you can drive net zero carbon targets, is something that's going to be in the gift, and businesses will look at FMs. So if you're prepared and ready for it, you've got a real good chance of actually getting into the right meetings and talking to the right people.
David, that's a perfect segue to my next question, because you've obviously talked about this even just now, and the guidance very much talks about that organization's risk appetite, tolerance, etc. If we need to raise awareness within an organization about the importance of maintenance strategies and how they contribute to overarching achievement of objectives, who are the key stakeholders to really have these conversations with that can shift the dial?
So first and foremost, it's who are the decision makers in the business, who are, the executive, the board, who controls that, decisions, because getting a clear steer from them of how they see the business and really focus on their objectives, then a well-educated FM can actually help them go, well, we need to put emphasis here. So they are the first and foremost stakeholders from the decisions. But obviously the key thing is who uses the building, how is it used, because some of the decision makers are completely detached from that. So you need to have a look at the actual users and understand what they want and what level of service that they actually expect. And there may be difficult conversations because the business may not be able to afford the level of service that some people expect, but there needs to be an understanding and an explanation of why that is. And the last thing is, and this will be coming on to next, is if you are outsourcing it, you have to use your outsource provider as a trusted partner. They are a key element to this. And, if you don't have the deep expertise, lean on them and trust them. If you have an adversarial, position, it will not work. You won't get the efficiencies. You won't get the benefits.
Sophie, can I just jump into what David said there?
Sure.
Absolutely agree with what he was saying about, who are you doing this for, to enable that business case and that interest, but also aligning with the business strategy. So what is the business strategy? For example, Arup's business strategy is attracting excellence and people. So that sits very firmly within FM. If your buildings don't attract the right people because they've come in for interview, it all does sit hand in hand, but it's about teasing out those pieces that actually can be affected by FM. Sorry for jumping in.
No, that's brilliant. And I do need to apologize. I was slightly overcome by a couple of Apaches that made everything shake around me because they were going extremely low. Apologies for that. Anthony, I was just going to bring you in because obviously, actually, as Steph already indicated as well, you really need to collaborate then with your service provider to make sure that they help optimize that relationship and really push those boundaries. How do you make that a success, and where do you see things go wrong occasionally as well?
So I mean, the conversation is changing really quickly. I think, again, I reference post-COVID, but all major departments on the board are now highly interested in space, well-being, attracting talent to their buildings, And so for the first time more than ever, and we see it in our customer base, there's a much more active debate about investment in those areas and what they need to do. And if I carry that logic on and you apply it to the sustainability work, all of a sudden there's almost an FM hub with the FM and the service provider to be really articulate about what options are available to that particular building owner and why. Where would we go? What choices would we take? David mentioned the words risk a lot, and with my glass half full, that you could change that word to opportunity. And there's a lot of opportunity for FMs to bring in and be creative and to think logically about where am I in my asset performance? What do I need to do to meet my business objectives? And I think the first point to make that success, I think Steph mentioned it, we must expect a lot from our service provider. Our service providers should be delivering fantastic business as usual services, but it should also be working with you to show you options, menued options about what you could and should be doing that you can promote, and you can start building your own planning. And I think the boards are expecting those conversations now. What can go wrong? I come back to the original point, running before we walk, being really honest with our own understanding of good maintenance today. Our FM maintenance on assets can do a wonderful job just by delivering the first and second maturity stages that David outlined. Do a really good job doing that, but you have to be honest with yourself. Where are we? Are we getting the right data? Are we getting the right levels of performance? Do we understand our assets? Do we understand the services? And once you've got that, and if you don't run past that too quickly, you can avoid it going wrong.
Brilliant. I've actually had a question come in from Andrew Perry that kind of builds on that, Anthony. When an organisation takes on a new facility, how often do they consider the business needs, resilience, maintainability of assets, and how can the informed FM advise on these aspects?
It's a great question. It's a really good question. And again, I think I would answer it far too often, although it's changing, far too often the on-take of a building, if it's with a service provider, is about DLAPs, and it's about getting the contract ready, getting the relationship ready. We said we'd go tell us the minimum, go work out the asset estate, and then commercially manage that from there on. But really, the debate is about how do we work together to baseline, and how do we work together on common goals. And if I look at my business and I look at our customers, the ones that enjoy greater gains are the ones that are agile and work with us and and push us towards their own goals, as opposed to trying to contract performance on an on-take of a building. If you don't outsource, it's really critical you get the expertise in to register that building, survey that building, condition-based assets, so that and then work with people, if you don't know yourself, around what are the next key steps to validating the financial performance of that building and the asset performance within it.
Great. Stephanie, would you have any further thoughts to this, given you have slightly different perspective?
I have to say I do agree with Anthony. Facilities managers need to be at the forefront of this. It's not just about how big is the office and is it in the right location. It's does it meet all of the objectives that you have, and one of those at the moment, hot topic, is the sustainable objectives, the carbon net zero, because you can give it to a facilities manager, but if they weren't there as part of the agreement and the organisation, then that you're already potentially falling at the first hurdle. And you do need the right expertise. And Anthony alluded to it earlier. We had a previous discussion, which was around the need for it was around the, sorry, beg your pardon. It was all around getting the right knowledge, and how, as previously, perhaps having that salesperson at the meeting that was trying to force us to take the next thing and the next thing, well, actually, a lot of people pushed back and that stopped. But now we need the innovators at those meetings. So your monthly meeting or your quarterly meetings needs to involve that innovation and that driving it forward. And if you are fortunate enough to be in that position with a good service provider and a good client, then perhaps a strategy moment where you actually align your strategies as a collective. Sorry, I went a bit off topic there.
If I may, and I think that's where, when I said the FM market is transforming, one of those areas is exactly around what Steph just said. For those of us that have lived and breathed maintenance for a long time, reporting to a customer about what happened in the past is a big part of the relationship between the service provider and the customer. And I'm really pleased to see customers start to challenge that and say, no, come on, what else, regardless of what you've done, where's the intelligence and the information that allows us to make some forward-looking decisions? And and that's the reason I think I've got this repetitive theme. If your customers, if your boards want you to go there and they want those options, you need a really strong base point of data and a good understanding of your estate to be able to derive those those golden shoots of potential change from the data that you're receiving from your service provider.
That's really great.
Sorry, if I may, that point of taking on a building, it's actually having the holistic viewpoint. Because why are you taking on that building? Is it because it's a key location, it's a signature building? But actually, is it going to help you with net zero carbon? Is it going to be efficient to operate and maintain? Can it be done with your existing capacity, or is it suddenly going to put up overhead on it? FMs can really get involved in those conversations. So it's informed decision making. Why is this the building, the right building, for us? But you need to understand the bigger picture, and it's not just, it looks very nice, it will really attract clients.
That's brilliant. I think I need to wind this little area of discussion up a little bit, because procurement is such an interesting area to really embed strategic outcomes, etc., and how you really can engage with the service providers within that, not just at procurement stage, but throughout the contract management. I could get lost in this for hours because I think it's mighty interesting. But I guess in kind of as a call to action to members, it really is to engage your providers as early as possible, but to also really change the conversation and the people that you bring into the conversations, and have that shift from what you put into the contract, really to change it from input to impact, and the difference we're going to make on impact, and therefore what the different options are to put on the table. Right, we touched on data quite a bit, and obviously the rapid pace of data, information and technology development has already been mentioned. That inevitably leads to asset management and the discussion around asset management and what the state of the nation is around that, around asset management and data, and how you all build that up. What is the current state of nation that you observe in this area?
Well, if I start on this one, as I highlighted in some of those documents being published by, the Office of Government Property, that all stemmed from an exercise in 2014 when there was a recognition that the public sector actually didn't even know how many buildings it had, let alone what assets were in those buildings. There's been a journey on the public sector of getting greater and greater granularity and accuracy in that data. The amount of times people just, oh well, just say that, and it's not clear and well understood. If you don't have accurate, up-to-date data, you will not make informed decisions that are right and appropriate. So, that's the key message. Importance of data, but it has to be accurate.
Steph, do you have any additions to make on that? particular area?
Yeah, absolutely. I think with regards to asset management, if you don't have a good knowledge of your assets, you can't even life cycle. And with regards to data, the data that you take from it can help you with your projections going forward, but also how well are things running already? So are there changes you can make internally, improvements? We're talking about carbon net zero, pushing the boundaries, but actually, what can you do to reduce the energy you're already using? Is your plant running out of hours, etc., etc.? And all of that data will enable you to see that. What we need is we need people that can interrogate the data. So it's great collecting it, but can we interrogate it? And also making sure that that data is put forward to those that can benefit from it as well. So the different ways in which it can be used.
Brilliant. Anthony, do you have anything further that?
I completely agree with what Steph said. That there is already a ocean of data out there in many forms. It's a bit sporadic. It's in pockets. Some customers are better than others. Some service providers are better than others. But it's with the technology pace that we're all racing towards. These really good things that are really going to be fantastic for our industry need accuracy, and they need standards, and it needs to be simple. Otherwise, we're not going to understand the outputs, and we're not going to be able to easily get the insights we need. I know it's come up a number of times, but I strongly recommend where it is starting really small and basic. If, as David said, there's not a good understanding of the estate, and if you are working with a provider, work much more closely with them to build and maintain the data sets you need to derive decisions. If you're looking at a report and you can't make a decision from it, it's probably not the right report. And if you're not interested in the some of the stats, you know, we provide 5-page reports, we provide 55-page reports. If it's not being read and questioned and challenged, and you've got to ask yourself what you want. And it's almost a good thing to do to start again on these things and just make sure that you're working together to build the so what's in the estate. If you come out of a meeting, or you come out of dialogue with your provider and you don't have 2 or 3 things that you could change, you might not want to, but you could change, that's where the most successful partnering comes from.
That's brilliant, Anthony. And I do love a so what question, because that's something I fatigue my colleagues with forever. So what? It's the brilliant one to ask. We've had another question come in from Andrew around kind of bringing that technology element together with the sustainability subject around refits. And refit, should they scope for the inclusion of new technologies such as IoT and other monitoring sensor systems, such as occupancy, movement, to enable efficient use of a facility by all stakeholders and not just focus on energy carbon?
It's what a great question. I'll start if I may. I think it's a very good open one, and I'm going to similar to my last input. We need to understand the whys of what we're doing. So there's something like 15 to 20 billion IoT sensors around the world today, and that is, and I don't know the exact stats, don't hold me to it, but it's probably 3 or 4 5 years ago. It's exploded, and I do wonder, of all those deployments of IoT, what's the gain that we've got from it? What are those insights? And there are lots of really good things that you can do around monitoring foot flow, humidity, desk management, how productive your staff are, social media use, where they go and why. There's wonderful things, but unless you can build that into, I know maybe I'm a stuck record on this, unless you can channel all that information into some, this is what we're going to do with it, I would caution it, because there's you want to boil the ocean. So there's lots of tech out there. If you're going specifically to a refit, you certainly need to take advantage of the refit process. If you were going to do something, bring that forward to make sure it's embedded, but you must understand why you're doing it in the first place. That would be my challenge. What are we getting out of doing it, or do we just do it because it's there? And there's a lot of that happening in the market.
And I think, you know, that would sort of segue into my point, which is, you know, what is your level of maturity? What are you trying to do? What is the end state you're trying to achieve? Because that should drive the questions and the information that you want, and therefore what sensors you will need. So, you know, having occupancy data is great, but are you going to then tie it back into your BMS so you only heat and light the spaces that you need? Is it going to drive behavioural change by saying, well, actually, if there's only going to be 20 people in a floor plate that's 100 and we can put them into, you know, one area, we only really need to, you know, deal with that rather than lighting the whole floor plate to the same level. But if you don't have a maturity and an understanding of what you can do with the data, as Anthony said, you will spend lots and lots of money and you won't necessarily see a return on that money. So just be clear what you're trying to achieve and the end state.
Brilliant.
I completely agree. I think if you're doing a refit, then you look at your life cycle as well. So if you are getting close to end of life or changing, then can you use that opportunity? Because it may need some additional work around it. But when it comes to sensors, what is it that you're trying to find? Because if you don't know, you could flood somewhere with sensors and actually you don't need them. Maybe you needed 3. You just need some indications of what's happening in certain spaces. You don't need sensors on everything everywhere. Nobody can analyze that data. And then there's the comparisons as well. So what do we compare? David mentioned, does that go back into your BMS to enable you to shut a floor down or shut an area of a floor down? Or does your occupancy data tie in with your access control data so you can see whether it's effective? Does your occupancy data tie in with detection data as to where people are on the floors? Do you need more meeting rooms, more desks? So there's the maintenance piece, there's the usage piece, and actually I think that's what a lot of board level people want to know, but they don't want to see streams and streams and streams of sensors on hundreds of desks, because it tells you nothing different from one to the other.
The thing I would say in a refit is there's an opportunity to get better performance data about energy usage and utility usage and how you can make that more efficient. So as a baseline, those are the things, you know, sub-metering, you know, on floors, you know, understanding where your power is going, it, you know, is a key thing to be able to make decisions.
Brilliant. We've had another question come in around sustainability from Mike, who wants to know around local energy systems, microgrids with PVs on the roof and batteries in the basement. And he really wants to know how such assets are maintained, managed, and their performance optimized. I saw all of you nod.
I can
go for it first time. Yeah, go for it.
So, you know, this goes back to, you know, let's, you know, walk before we can run. If you are going to invest in that level of technology, do you have the understanding of what it does and how it needs to be maintained? You know, if you've got an outsourced provider, have you had conversations with the outsourced provider and, you know, made sure that they have the capability and that knowledge to bring that forward? You know, the way the world is going to change, you know, high efficiency gas boilers, even CHP is likely to, you know, be phased out with a view at the moment of electrification and heat pumps. That is the current thing. Will it be the current thing in 10, 20 years time? Possibly not. You know, we're evolving at a rapid rate. But understanding the technology and making sure you've got competence, but don't start investing in things that you really don't know how to optimize. Otherwise you'll spend a lot of money on it and won't get the benefit.
I think totally agree with David. I think one thing that sprung to mind as I was listening to David to the question is, wherever you're doing it, you've got to check the quality of the power to the building, and you've got to, so a power survey, the there's a lot of pressure out there with electrification generally, and the demand is not met. So there's curtailment programs, there's a number of initiatives going on across the UK. So it's a big investment to make. Getting a proper power survey would be a good starting point.
I think it also takes us back to the comments that we had previously of innovation and pushing boundaries together. So client and service provider together, because if your service providers can't support it, then you're not going to be able to support it on your own. So I think it's if there's a way forward that not everybody is getting involved in or touched on, then can you and your service provider push those boundaries together?
And if I may, that specific thing about microgeneration, I'm an absolute supporter of it, but just make sure that actually, the demand and the ability to generate is matched. Because is it tokenism? Are you just putting it on because you want to be able to say we have, microgeneration, and you're going to spend money and it won't actually have much of an impact? You need to be clear about, does it make good business decision? Is there going to be return on investment for it?
Brilliant. I'm mindful of time, so I'm working towards a closing question of one key question you would want to leave, or one key message you would want to leave people with. But before we get there, an important part, we're talking about excellence in maintenance here. One of the other areas that we know as well is that there's a skills gap in FM. So who is going to deliver this, and what are kind of the skills that we're looking to deliver this? And we've already touched a little bit on this, but it would be nice to crystallize those points around the skills here.
Go on, Anthony.
No, I can't now. You've started, Steph. I need to bow to you. Go on.
It's very kind of you. I would say that from my perspective, I would expect it to sit with the service providers. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't think there's an FM out there that wouldn't want a data specialist sat within their team, because they want to have all of that information at their fingertips, trending, etc. But I don't think there's enough people out there to do it. There's certainly not enough specialists out there at the moment. And I would expect that to be something that the service providers can grow within their business. And actually they can develop it around what it is they're trying to achieve for their clients.
I think the only add to that from a service provider lens, there is a huge competitive demand on trades generally, and I think that's because people are going. I think the lack of supply into the water and feeding of the appropriate resources into the trades is not where it needs to be. We've got to do a lot of work there to encourage people into trade. And if you fast forward 10 years, data science and behavioral science and well-being will be core tenets of service provision. And we're starting to have those conversations now. We didn't really pick up much on it, but how we behave in a building has a huge knock-on consequence to your strategy moving forward. We can't just look at the technology or the maintenance or the FM. It's how staff and service users operate within buildings is a really important thing. And of course, as the technology and the open nature of open protocol kit starts to really expand, the engineer won't just be taking a screwdriver with them. They might have a laptop and they might be doing some programming. So that comes to the gap and the future, Sophie, is how are we attracting graduate talent, people with math and IT literacy far beyond what's in there today. And how do you drag them to the trade, and how do you drag the trade skills into more technology bias work, and that's the challenge for the market, I think.
Brilliant. David, any thoughts on key messages from your side?
Yeah, and really, if you're struggling to find the right people, I go back to the issue of apprenticeships and start growing them. Start having conversations, with the UTCs, the FE colleges, the providers, in the universities that provide apprenticeships. Start talking to them from a sector point of view of what the demand is and what you need, and they're more than willing, working in an educational institution, they're more than willing to actually get that market information so they can tailor their courses to actually employability of the people they're training is at the top, because that's one of the strongest measures. So I think there's conversations to be had with the supplier of the workforce, or the trainers of the workforce, and there's an opportunity to fine tune, and things will change. Technology is going to be there, but as Anthony highlights, there will still need to be the traditional trades. And at the moment, the demographic of those trades is only going in one direction, and it's the wrong direction.
Thank you. Stephanie, Anthony, any final closing thoughts? Stephanie?
I think just to add to what both Anthony and David said, I would like to see more around apprenticeships. So I would like to see an awful lot more around apprenticeships, certainly with the data. The Gen Z definitely have an awful lot. They have a much better handle on technology than certainly my age group. And the stuff that they can do coming through, if that's just focused and put into the areas where we need to develop, I think that we will all be flying. And with the way that degrees are going and the elitism around it, I would like to see far more support for lots of people to come through and progress and actually hit great heights with new innovative ideas that we've not even considered.
Brilliant. Thank you. Anthony?
I just very quickly, risk is opportunity, and I see we're in unprecedented times in the FM industry, and it's incredibly exciting. Space and attracting people to space has a heightened awareness around it like I've never seen in my career lifetime, and that's generating lots of open questions where we don't currently have the answers. So it's a brilliant time to come into the industry and join and make make the contribution. Getting the basics done brilliantly is a phrase that we use in Wates a lot, and that's probably one of my final themes, is just make sure you can do a wonderful job wherever you are on your maturity stage by just making sure you and or your service provider are doing everything they could within their scope. And again, it's too easy to forget. People turn up to do stuff to assets to maintain a environment, and getting that done well is a very good step in the right direction.
Brilliant. Thank you, Anthony. Do your basics well. Well, you can't keep the foundations strong if you don't do that. Thank you very much. I hope to have helped the audience to establish some key areas and approaches in your mind around how to optimize maintenance. Do you know your organization's risk appetite? What level of maturity are you at within your organization? Do you have the data to make those evidence-based decisions? And do you understand the menu of options available? And can you work with your suppliers to push the boundaries of innovation and knowledge to deliver through facilities against your organizational strategic objectives? We displayed the CPD number, and you can get the guidance from our website. It's downloadable there on the screen, or via the news section on our website. And that leaves me to thank everyone here. David, thank you very much for your presentation. Listeners, thank you very much. A recording will be available. Thank you to Anthony and Wates for supporting us in this very important piece of work. And last but definitely not least, Stephanie, thank you for sharing your experience. And actually, a thank you as well to our webinar team. And hopefully see you next time. Have a lovely day. Bye.
Thank you.